we're going to continue with another story. This one is probably just as, if not more interesting than what we just covered. I've been looking forward to reading this a lot. Newsmax: Kentucky clerk still fighting same-sex marriage ruling. What is going on with this? Her name is Kim Davis. The Kentucky County Clerk, who became known around the world for her opposition to the U.S. Supreme Court's 2015 ruling that legalized same-sex marriage, is still arguing in court that it should be overturned. Kim Davis became a cultural lightning rod 10 years ago, bringing national media and conservative religious leaders to eastern Kentucky. I keep yawning. I didn't get enough sleep last night, sorry. Eastern Kentucky, she continued for weeks to deny the licenses. So even after Oberfell, she was still like, nope, I'm not doing that. I'm standing by my convictions. She later met Pope Francis in Rome and was parodied on Saturday Night Live. Of course, Saturday Night Live did that. They're bullcrap. Unfunny. They didn't used to be, but they are now. Davis began denying marriage licenses to same-sex couples after the Supreme Court's landmark ruling in Oberfell v. Hodges on June 26, 2015. Videos of a same-sex couple argued with Davis in the clerk's office over their denial of a license drew national attention to her office. She defied court orders to issue the licenses until a federal judge jailed her for contempt of court in September 2015. Davis was released after her staff issued the licenses on her behalf, but removed her name from the form. The Kentucky legislature later enacted a law removing the names of all county clerks from state marriage licenses. Davis said her faith forbade her from what she saw as an endorsement of same-sex marriage. Faith leaders and conservative political figures, including former Arkansas Governor Mike Huckabee and then Kentucky Governor Matt Bevin, rallied to her cause. After her release from jail, Davis addressed the media, saying that issuing same-sex marriage licenses would be conflicting with God's definition of marriage as a union between one man and one woman. This would be an act of disobedience to my God. Davis declined a request for an interview from the Associated Press for this story. No wonder Kim Davis didn't want to talk to the Associated Press. Has anyone been paying attention to that? The Associated Press is garbage. They are libs just like most of the other mainstream media. So that's not really a surprise. In 2018, one of the men who had confronted Davis over her defiance ran for her office. David Ermold said he believed people in Rowan County were sick of Davis and wanted to move on. When he went to file his papers for the Democratic primary, Davis, a Republican, was there in her capacity as clerk to sign him up. Sitting across a desk from each other, the cordial meeting contrasted the first time they met 3 years earlier. That's funny. Both candidates lost, Ermold in the primary and Davis in the general election. She has not returned to politics. Davis's lawyers are attempting again to get her case before the Supreme Court after the High Court declined to hear an appeal from her in 2020. So it's not that they ruled no, they declined to even read or hear an appeal from her. Well, now they're trying to do it again. And that was in 2020. And so in 2020, depending on when it was brought up, it was probably before Amy Coney Barrett was in. Now that Amy Coney Barrett is in, and they're not having to deal with both that and also the Supreme Court may have been looking at stuff regarding the 2020 election, it could be a different situation. Excuse me. I cannot stop yawning. I should have drank an energy drink or something. I had coffee, but it wasn't enough. A federal judge has ordered Davis to pay a total of $360,000 in damages and attorney's fees to Ermold and his partner. Davis lost a bid in March to have her appeal of that ruling heard by a federal appeals court, but she will appeal again to the Supreme Court. Her attorney, Matt Staver of the Liberty Counsel, MAT, not MATT, said the goal is to affirm Davis's constitutional rights and overturn Oberfell. So that was on Newsmax, but reposted from the Associated Press. Want to hear your thoughts. What do you think is going to happen with the Supreme Court, and what do you think should happen? Want to hear your thoughts. Now, also, we have a source from SCOTUS blog basically saying the same thing. Will the Supreme Court revisit its ruling on same-sex marriage? On SCOTUS blog by Amy however it's pronounced. In 2015, shortly after the Supreme Court recognized a constitutional right to same-sex marriage in Oberfeld v. Hodges, a local county clerk from Kentucky made national headlines when she refused on religious grounds to issue a marriage license to a gay couple, David Moore and David Ermold. Both named David. That's weird. Kind of like Dave Rubin and David, whatever his name is, his so-called husband. That clerk, Kim Davis, is back in the news again this summer. This time because she has asked the justices to overturn their 2015 decision. Although, as a statistical matter, Davis may face tough odds on convincing the Supreme Court to grant review, the real question is whether there are 4 votes to revisit Oberfeld and 5 to overrule it. In 2015, Davis was the clerk of Rowan County, Kentucky. Her job description included using licenses, such as marriage licenses, to county residents. After the Supreme Court's decision in Oberfeld, Kentucky's governor at the time, Steve Beshear, sent a letter to the clerks in all of the state's counties, directing them to license and recognize the marriages of same-sex couples. So Kentucky's governor at the time of this did send a letter to the clerks to license and recognize the marriages. So the former governor that stood by her was not, obviously being a former governor, he wasn't in power. I read that article from Associated Press and made it sound like that guy was in office, but no. Steve Beshear was Kentucky's governor at the time. And no, he stood with the Obama administration vis-a-vis the Supreme Court again. Because why? The Supreme Court justices did what they did because it was politically expedient at the time. There is no part of the Constitution, there is no part of law in our nation pre-2015 to say that it needed to be nationally recognized. If anything, they could have decided for that case and said, okay, that's how that one case goes. But that's not the standard for the entire nation. Why? Because of the 10th Amendment. If it's not a power enumerated in the Constitution, if it's not enumerated to the executive or to Congress, it should go first to the states, then to the people. That's the Constitution, 10th Amendment, folks. Although a county attorney told Davis that she would be required to issue marriage licenses to same-sex couples, Davis opted instead to stop issuing marriage licenses to anyone gay or straight. While this moratorium was in effect, Davis refused to issue a marriage license to Moore and Ermold. She told the couple she was acting under God's authority and they could get a marriage license in a different county. So she told them, I'm not just saying no, I'm saying not here. I refuse to, but you can go to a different county and do it there. But they ended up turning it into a big deal, and it was Oberfeld v. Hodges. And that should not have been ruled that way. Now, something I want to say before I talk about some other cases the Supreme Court has done and other court cases, because in a lot of ways, the legal system in this country is kind of screwed. But there's a lot of Republicans, and I genuinely want to hear your thoughts. So say something in the live chat, or if you're watching this on the archive, comment. Some of you are going to be watching this on Spotify, listening to this on Spotify, or you got YouTube pulled up and you're watching the podcast episode where there's no video, but it's just the audio. Comment. I want to hear your thoughts. There's a decent amount of Republicans who are saying, don't do it, Supreme Court, because if you do, there's going to be a backlash in 2026, and the House and Senate are not going to be red. We need to have a red House and Senate, or it's going to be just so bad. Well, hate to break it to you, but if the economy doesn't get better, the House and Senate are probably going to be gone anyway. That's A. And B, I think a lot of people, especially people my age and younger, are very tired of the argument to do what is politically expedient, because if we don't, it's going to cause us some kind of discomfort or pain in the future. There's a lot of us who are saying, no, we need to use power against the left. And if that means the Supreme Court putting their foot all the way to the floor, giving this Trump train, some gas, so be it. We're tired because we've lost and lost and lost. We lost in 2015 with Oberfeld. We lost in 2012 with the re-election of Obama. We lost in 2008 with the first election of Obama. And you can make the argument we lost in 2004 and 2000 as well with the election of Bush, both in the primary and then in 04, the general, because he was an incumbent at that point. Real right-wingers have not had one of their own in since probably Calvin Coolidge. There's not been a real right winger in there. Nixon was okay. Reagan was not completely bad. Reagan had his